I am unashamed. What about you?
I didn't figure that you two boys would actually end up knowing as much as you do. So I'm pleasantly surprised when I hear y'all pontificate on anything, even bats.
You're wondering how we turned out so smart, right?
Well, are you ready? I'm fixing to blow your mind with what I'm fixing to tell you.
Oh boy.
I am not going to embellish. I'm just going to give you the facts of what happened. And if we had seatbelts in our chairs, I would recommend putting one on.
In other words, this is right next to blast off.
Yeah, this just happened. So I'm in Austin, and my assistant is Missy's aunt. It's very hard to describe. So her son would be my
nephew,
cousin? But like in-law, because it's Missy's aunt, right?
Right.
All right. Well, she's out.
That'd be cousins, yeah. You'd be that.
So is that my cousin?
That'd be your cousin-in-law.
In-law.
Yeah.
Okay, so she's at our house. I'm in Austin, and we're like having a meeting, Missy and I, and our, because she works for us, and she also runs the Mia.
She's
movie.
Missy's aunt, but she's not much older than Missy.
No, that's weird.
Which is confusing to me because she's Peggy, her mom's younger sister, so they're kind of near the same age. Okay.
Well, something happens. Her phone starts going off, and she just starts becoming real emotional. And I'm like, "What's going on?" She's
That's
like,
common to all women.
Well, no comment. So she becomes real emotional, and she says, Missy's like, "What's going on?" And she said, "Well, which I wasn't up on the situation, but her son and his wife were expecting a baby." And so they decided, I don't know the reason. I mean, maybe it was because we're coming off this coronavirus or whatever, but they decided they were going to have the baby via the midwife. So that was the plan, right?
So midwives are back.
They're back.
They're
not going to the hospital. We got a midwife. We're going to do this here. They have it all planned out. Well, the midwife wasn't there, and all of a sudden, his wife says, "This is happening." So the reason she became emotional is because her son, my cousin-in-law, says, "This is happening and the midwife is not here." So my assistant says, "Call the midwife." So he gets on, because at this point when I'm hearing this story, I'm like, this is kind of like you're on an airplane and something happens to the pilot, and now you're in the seat.
you're driving the plane.
So you call a friend and say, "What do I do?" So this starts happening.
And these are young people, obviously.
Yeah, they're young.
20s.
I mean, this guy's he's not in the medical field, all right? So he knows nothing. And the baby starts coming out, and he just assumes the center position, I guess, to make a football analogy. He gets under center and starts calling the plays here to his wife. And I'm like, I started getting a little nauseous, thinking, what if I was in this situation?
Oh, my word.
And so he's like, I see the head. Here we go. The shoulders get hung. They're just walking him through this. And so, look, from start to finish, it's 40 minutes. And when the baby comes out after there was a problem with the shoulders getting hung, and I mean, he's like, I had to go up in there. And I was just like, oh, wow. Well, the baby's born, but the water hadn't broken. And so he's talking to this midwife, and he's like, because they're like, what is going on? It's like, well, there's this sack of fluid over the baby. They're like, you have to bust that because the baby can't breathe. So it was like an anxious, panic-filled moment. It's like, well, what do I bust it with? She said, whatever is nearby.
Oh my goodness.
So he looks over on his nightstand. I mean, he's in his bedroom, has never done this, hadn't even read a manual. Somebody's telling him. He looks over there. He had hung some fixtures with using a drill bit, and so he grabs a drill bit, and you can't make. I told you to put your seatbelt on, and he breaks the water so the baby can breathe. And 40 minutes, start to finish, baby born. When he sent us the picture, the cord was still attached because he's like,
well, now he's got to figure out how do I get this off.
Well, they were getting to that step.
And find some hedge clippers or something to get that off. I mean, this is like tool time comes to the birth.
My cousin-in-law, and then about when all the fuss was over, the midwife shows up. So he's like, done. But it made me think, we're paying tens of thousands of dollars to these people out here delivering these babies, and I guess, you know, in case something goes wrong is why you do that.
Well, because the birth of a child, as you just described, it's quite the happening. I mean, it's a violent.
I compared it to
precarious situation.
I compared it when I watched Jephthah being born, y'all's younger brother, to the gutting of a hog.
Oh, good.
I mean, I just looked down and I saw all what was going on there, and I thought, I don't know. You question these women from time to time. I said, but I officially saluted womanhood worldwide when I saw Miss Kay have a child. I said, you know what? I said, I don't think men could stand that.
Well, and in this case with your cousin-in-law, I mean, the fear factor would be, and I would have the same thing, since I don't know any. I mean, I would be, if you mess up here or feel like you messed up, I mean, literally your son or daughter, was it a boy or a girl?
I have to think now. All the confusion. Did I ever get
Oh, that's pretty good. Actually missed
was
that
a
one.
girl?
So the baby and mother are doing well. What's the upside of it?
Everybody. The upside was I walked outside feeling like I could do anything.
Yeah,
I really did. I thought, here's a couple in their house, and they're doing something, I guess, unique.
So the idea they didn't want it in a hospital because they didn't want it to catch a coronavirus.
No, I don't know the reason.
No, I think there's a movement now across our culture. I've been hearing about this more, about people wanting to have their children at home, because there's something going on with, like the one I was reading about. The wife is in the bathtub full of water, and you have the child in the water. You know, that's supposed to be, I don't know. I mean, so I'm sure somebody out there listening will tell us what all this stuff is about. But there seems to be kind of a movement to get away from the whole hospital thing. But now Sadie just had a baby, last week, her daughter, but the problem was, Jase, from what was told to us, she had the same situation with her daughter's shoulders. They're real wide, which, after seeing her husband, I can see why. She's married to Captain America. And the shoulders got hung up. She said every nurse in there, because this 9-pound baby that Sadie had, was on top of her stomach to push that daughter out. I mean, 3 or 4 nurses, which sounds just like tough, but I mean, it was like a panic moment.
Well, to show you sort of a little sequence event, I was born in 46, but prior to me being born, and I think Tommy too, the first 3, they just had them at home.
Yeah.
Ma just had them in your house.
Right.
In this case, a log cabin, I mean, looked like if you'd walked up there, you'd have, except for the old Ford car sitting over, you'd have thought it was 1850s instead of 19. But anyway, they had them. They had a midwife, usually kinfolks, aunts, your mother's sister. They'd have somebody that would be there, and they just had them there. They didn't go to the clinic or anything else.
Yeah.
I mean, just raw boned it the whole way.
Yeah.
Well, that was about 2 or 3 ahead of me. But by the time they got more sophisticated, by the time my birthday was ready to happen, so they go to a clinic, drive to a clinic, but they're out in the next day. I mean, they just walk out and, have the happy.
What was the name of the old doctor? She always used to say
Pardue.
Yeah, Dr. Pardue. I always heard that.
It was
story.
a girl. I remember
this
now.
is his fee. You talk about Doc and Matt Dillon, Dr. Pardue, Ma would say,
Gunsmoke reference.
I'd be a little kid. I've been sewn up, one time I gouged a big scar, still a big scar right in my leg there. So stuff like that, he'd just walk up there and Dr. Party, yeah, man, he'll be all right. He said, let me see what here. He'd go over, of course, I don't remember any deadening. No, they just suck it up. But he patched it up. And she said, what owe you, Dr. Party? He said, about $1. She'd come out with $1. Give him $1. You walk out and get back in your old car. Drive.
Times have changed. And when you say
there was a girl.
We never heard of insurance or Medicare, Medicaid, none of that.
I'm saying. They named her River.
Life was far more simple in those days. But I'm just going to tell you, boys, y'all are young bucks, younger. I say y'all young. Y'all going to be middle aged, and
we're already there.
You're catching me. But I'm just saying. Life was a lot more simpler then, much more simple, but it was the way to roll.
Well, even in my lifetime, Des,
it was just
you carried on the same tradition. The first urologist that you saw, I wound up saying he's dead now. He was kind of an old salty guy, duck hunter, and so you traded him some fish for him to see years ago.
Yep.
And so I thought, that seems like a pretty good deal there. And so. When had a vasectomy done, and so I went out, I was like, how much is this going to cost me? He said, probably about 2 Opelousas catfish dressed, be good to go.
Bartering, it's a great system.
So I basically traded a vasectomy for 2 Opelousas catfish. Now,
I don't like that deal.
Not blue cat, ops. It had to be ops.
Yeah, I know, but
he knew the difference.
I don't like anything about the deal. I have a rule I live by. No metallic instruments are allowed below the belly button for any reason.
Yeah, you wait till that old prostate starts going on.
You know what? I'll deal with it.
And because I said, I'm not going to fool with these doctors, but when I started crawling toward the bathtub and looked down, and look, you're talking about the old prostate, the old testicles. They both get about the size of that cup right there. You say, okay, that old doctor said, he'll be back. He told us, okay, he'll call me. She said, he ain't coming back. Well, I did, but it was crawling. Woo! You talk about rough.
Well, I said I was going to break the chain on that. If I have any prostate issues, which I'm starting to have now because genetic. I said, I'm going to the doctor early and often because I don't want to be down on my hands.
So two different issues, but you're saying there is, I should have an amendment to allowing it a metal instrument below the belly button.
My question.
If I develop, what exactly was the call?
Any kind of prostate problem. Yeah. But the bottom line is, I thought about that, when I'm saying, the old way, the Barting way, the charge you $1 to go see a doctor. It was a great way to live. And not very many hospital visits at all. But, I just thought about that. When these old men started having prostate problems, back in the day, these old cats, they lived to be old as the hills.
Well,
but when they had prostate problems, what did they do?
Well, they
other than just
suffer.
I want to say suck it up, but there ain't no sucking this up.
I do think if you go back, the life expectancy probably was younger than it is now.
Well, no doubt it was because and you eventually prostate cancer. There's but you're right. It was mostly later in life, and you got to die of something. But it'd be a painful way.
I knew some old people, and I said, "Mom, what's that? What's wrong with Mr. What's that on his head?" And she said, "Oh, that's a big cancer he's had." He said, "Since he's about 20, and just be a big
growth
on the side of his head." He lived about 95. Finally,
oh my goodness!
Finally passed on. So
finally got him.
You got by with less, that's for sure.
Let's take a break. So we've been talking about in Romans 1 in particular, how people can invent ways of doing evil when you're on the destructive path. One of our sponsors, Home Title Lock, has found another way that we have talked about quite a bit on the podcast, that there are people now that they're cyber thieves is what they call them. So they get on the internet and they figure out ways to hack into your information and steal things from you,
They invent ways of doing evil.
Exactly. And so they've invented a new one. Facebook had 500 million accounts exposed to cyber thieves, according to the FBI.
500 what?
500 million. So that's how prevalent these thieves are out there. They get your name, address, personal information, and once they get it, they can, in this case, they go in and steal someone's home right out from under you because, you know, your title is put out there.
What I'm still asking, the question I've still been asking, and this is supposed to be a good thing.
Well,
the computer world.
It is a good thing if you're listening to Unashamed. Not so good if they're stealing your home. So here's what you want to do. Go to HometitleLock.com. Register your address. Make sure you're not a victim. You get 30 days of free protection. They're going to make sure that you're covered. HometitleLock.com. Use the promo code RADIO. That's HometitleLock.com. Promo code RADIO. Well, Jase, you're right. My mind is blown. So it was a girl you found out.
It was a girl. I knew it was, but look, I have trouble when I tell that story now, getting past the drill bit. Because, boy, when that happened, there was something inside of me said, yes. Okay. So what were your tools? You know, because I can hear him saying, so there I was. That's my wife. The baby's coming out. I took a drill bit. And in less
he's
than
got
an
a
hour,
story now.
Baby born.
But
so
all
the
movies, though, they get like boiling water and strips of linen.
No,
I don't know.
Hot water was the first thing they asked for.
I'll tell you something else, too. I left this out of the story, but it's a key component. He did all this by himself with his 3-year-old saying, Daddy, what's this?
Oh,
Daddy, what have we
boy.
done? Daddy. So just to make it, yeah, we have
I hate to ask this, but what line of work is this dude in?
Well, he's not delivering babies, I can tell you that.
That's why I asked, what's he decided he's going to be a delivery
designing
man?
houses, and he's an architect in that world.
And the 3-year-old was present for the whole thing. That child will never be the same. I mean, that's quite the thing to witness.
You know, if you wanted a family bonding moment, if you need something to tell you that we as a family can do anything and make, just deliver your own baby with a drill bit. That pretty well, you don't have nowhere to go but up after
Most of
that.
the time at water breaks before we get to that.
I know. I thought that was crazy.
I've never even heard it. Yeah.
I mean, my favorite line of the entire thing was the midwife is whatever you can find.
Yeah.
I mean, at that point, forget boiling water. We need this baby breathing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he's like, had a drill bit in arm's reach. I mean, I was just, the redneck inside of me was like, okay.
But
boy.
But just think about that for just a minute. We've been talking a lot about God, the creator, and from what is seen is leaves you without excuse. Think about what you just described. So a baby for 9 months is living in a sack of water and breathing it.
And other fluids.
Yeah. Breathing, underwater, which you can't do once you're born. Once they cut that sack, then you're breathing air from that point forward.
Man.
How crazy is that? I mean, like, what could come up? What do you say, Dale? What department in saltwater came up with that plan?
Yeah.
Well, it leads back to our last podcast of what we're saying. For you to believe that this all just happened randomly, and all this sophistication and really intellect and details is coming from just nothingness, which would be, from an intellectual view, just an idiot, a dumbfounded plan.
And think about all
doesn't
the
make
other,
sense.
all the other living things. When it comes to human beings, they don't have the law. A certain group, the Gentiles, they didn't know anything about the law of Moses. You say, so how could God say they were sinful? They didn't have a code to break.
Right.
So Romans chapter 2 that's coming up, they show that the requirements of the law are written on their hearts.
Yeah.
The old conscience, the conscience is there. Their conscience is also bearing witness that this is not right, but I'm going to do it anyway. I mean, but something is telling them. You say, where's that coming from? Yeah. Well, the animal world, you can train them, but they don't deal with the issues that human beings deal with. This whole thing about we came from animals, and that's where we got our conscience. You're like, their thoughts now accusing even defending them. You do something and your conscience says, at first it says, why'd you do that? That you know better than that. And you feel this guilt. So,
Right.
Then the next thing your conscience might do, it begins to defend you by saying this to you. Well, everybody else is doing it. I mean,
I'm not as bad as that guy.
I'm not as bad as. Well, that's Romans chapter 2.
Exactly.
About those, you therefore have no excuse, you who pass judgment on someone else. The cancel culture comes to mind. I got a book on it coming out. For at whatever point you judge the other, you're condemning yourself, because you who pass judgment do the same things.
That's right.
So you look at it, you say, can't be any accusations unless you're sin-free.
It's like when Bobo goes up to the end of the road, when some of the dogs up here in Jimmy Red's empire go in heat.
Yep.
He doesn't come back feeling bad about, you know, his whole, immoral situation.
No.
He doesn't even bat an eye, does he?
Nope.
I mean, that's the difference in us and him. It's interesting because with my grandkids, I mean, they're so obvious. Like, they'll do something wrong. They'll be doing something they've been told not to do. And you walk in a room and you look at them and they have a look on their face that instantly you're doing something you're not supposed to. What are you doing? What do you got there? Mm-hmm. So it's built into us to have this conscience idea. It takes a while to understand the implications of it.
But what's amazing, Al, I mean, and Phil, we talked about last podcast that, we attack the excuses, because when you try to attack the behavior, people argue right and wrong, or, they justify what they do, but when you attack the excuse, and I brought up that Colossians 1, because you become an enemy of God in your mind first. To detach yourself from the idea that God created us, and to justify the way you live and decisions you make, who you hang out with, you come up with these excuses in your mind. But even to your point, what's amazing to me is two of the excuses, I think, for why people don't surrender to Jesus is they're on two opposite extremes. Some people think they're too bad.
Yep.
They're like, well, I'm too far gone.
Right.
Well, some people think they don't need God because they're good
on their own.
And you see that they're in the same camp, but one of them says, I like my life.
Mm-hmm.
I don't. And another person's like, I don't like my life, but I can't be forgiven. So that's what's strange to me on how, this spiritual war we have, is that it's just hard. The reason we talk about this for hours,
right,
is that it's hard to put everything in a simple little box, because we're all individuals. We're all different. Even to go back to their baby being born, just think of the trust there. I'm looking at it because I'm a man. I'm looking at it from the man's perspective, but what about his wife? She's sitting there, no pain medication, none of it's already traumatic.
No
and so
epidurals.
Now you're looking to the doctor for confidence. Oh no, it's my husband with a drill bit in his hand. I'm like, this woman needs, the trust factor there.
Yeah.
Just us as humans. And I think that leads to another excuse, which is what he got into, which was the whole point of your sermon, which led to last time, is there's different lanes on this broad road to destruction. There's different excuses, because it all comes down to your posse, really. We all have people that we're around that influence us, and we have our own ideas and our own excuses in our mind, but it's really hard when you have around you people are saying, there's no God. Those people, they're a bunch of hypocrites, and you're good enough. You're a good moral person, because he addresses the different ways, but still it comes down to that excuse, because he had just said you can see God's invisible powers.
Right.
Then he gets to chapter 2, so he's going to get into the different types of behaviors. I'm a pretty good moral person, but in his first line is, you therefore have no excuse. It keeps going back to how you justify your existence and the decisions you make.
I think part of it was in verse 32, which is kind of a transition. When Dad read that last time, not only do they do these things, but also approve of those who practice them. You think about it, if a person, looks at most of the world and says, they're terrible. I mean, those people, they're doing terrible stuff, but what do I care as long as you don't affect me with it? A lot of people are like that. They don't have any God conscience in themselves. They don't want to be, as long as you don't get into my life and my world, I don't care what you do. And it's this same mindset that you see here. You're still without excuse, just like the other people are. Just because you compare yourself to them doesn't mean anything. It's kind of a lack of self-awareness more than anything.
When you look at this,
hang on, Jase, let's take a break. So obviously we've been affected a lot by one of our sponsors, Ancestry.com, because we literally discovered that you had a daughter, she had a dad, you, and we had a sister that we never would have known about had we not gotten to the point where people can look at their DNA and figure some stuff out,
And she did the looking.
Yeah. And for a pretty good while before she found us, which is really interesting. And now she's an integral part of our life. Which is pretty exciting. She lives here in West Monroe. So if you, I'm not saying you go look just to see if you have children. It may just be to find out a little bit about your background, but you never know when you may have a great blessing around the corner. So we love the guys at Ancestry.com. You can discover your family history, bring your family together. It's Ancestry.com/Phil. You can learn about your past. You can share stories about your past. Get closer to your family. Ancestry.com/Phil. Check out your family tree. So go to Ancestry.com/Phil and you get a free trial.
When you look at the spiritual thing, a lot of that, my cousin-in-law having that experience and, and his wife, I look at that from a spiritual viewpoint as in, we're born again. When Jesus told Nicodemus, you got to be born again, and even from the water not breaking, I thought, I thought the same thing about the water had to be broken. He had to do it. But, he could have made a lot of excuses. Number one being, I'm not qualified to do this. But he didn't do that. It's his wife. It's his baby.
He waited a little late on contacting the midwife.
Might just start that a little bit.
According to them, this just like it went from, it's a beautiful day in the neighborhood, we got all this planned out, to
911.
Stop the presses. This baby's coming out now. And so because of love, he bypassed all the excuses. And I thought about that from a spiritual view, because it's messy and it takes courage and to bring someone to Christ.
Yeah.
But you think about, we're doing the same thing. We're out there sharing Jesus with people. We have them in our homes, and it's messy, and sometimes it's you're scared, or whatever the situation is. And you can always make an excuse on why you shouldn't do it, but that love for changing eternal destiny is really what it gets down to saying we want new births to occur.
That's right.
And I think it's a good analogy.
The beauty of hearing the gospel and obeying it and being in Christ, the beauty of it, because you got that Romans chapter 2 that he's fixing to come up with, but the beauty of this is, let's see, everyone who sins breaks the law. In fact, sin is lawlessness, but he appeared so that he might take away our sins. And this little phrase, in lieu of what the Apostle Paul said in Romans, because after I read that about the conscience, this will take place. You say, some kind of replay. Not for the ones in Christ, because in Christ, in him, he appeared so that he might take away sins, and in him is no sin. So when the replay begins at Judgment Day, the replay is only for the wicked, and all of them that justified all these things that their conscience said, what are you doing? Their sins are going to come forward. So this is why you're going to perish.
Right.
You had the opportunity to have this taken care of. Being in my son, you wouldn't even be counted as a sinner at all. Right. In Jesus is no sin.
Right.
So it's protection. The person you're in, it's like, the cauldron in the middle of the earth is generating this force field that keeps meteorites and all this stuff from hitting the earth.
Right.
It's protection there. When you get in Jesus, no replay.
Yeah.
God just looked at you and said, I don't see any sin. Oh, you're one of the ones that embraced my son. No sin
right.
for you. So it's pretty cool because he said this will take place on the day when God will judge men's secrets. All the things you thought, that replay, it ain't gonna lie. Through Jesus Christ, as my gospel declares. So the gospel comes forth. The only place it comes forth, by the way, in 3 chapters from 118 to 320, there's no good news. It's all bad news. Even that, you say the gospel is going to declare you innocent. So,
where was that at? What text? That's First John.
Yeah, that's Romans 2, and I read 1 John chapter 3, verse 4.
So it takes away that excuse, Jase, we talked about, I think on the last podcast, about the excuse of, well, you're a hypocrite because you still sin. But they never understand that Jesus took all our sin. I mean, the idea about living unashamed is not just what Paul said, I'm unashamed of the gospel, but I live without shame.
Yeah.
Because even when I mess up, that's why he died for me. As long as I'm willing to profess my allegiance to Christ, he takes care of everything.
We probably don't stress the mediating work in the relationship we have with God where no sin's being counted against you.
Right.
You know, you can't live like the devil. You know, just get up and do what's right. And your mistakes you make as you go forward, they're not counted against you. Right. You're in a position where the sins can't get to you. Even though you make them, the blood is removing even your future sins. Well, we probably need to stress that a little more to people.
Oh, you're right.
But I think a hidden theme in Romans is, because he says in Romans that I brought up before, in Romans 1:17, and then he reiterates it from a different perspective in chapter 3 and 21 and 22, that this righteousness, this freedom, this forgiveness, it's coming from God. It's not coming from your own human performance.
That's correct.
Because no matter what lane you're in on the road to destruction, whether you're what were your categories, Al?
So you got the depraved lane, which is the first one. That's
which
that
is
wide,
Romans 1, what?
18 to 32.
Okay, then what's the next one?
Get that Bible out of my face.
That's the guy who he hates God and hates people who
consciences have been seared. You don't even feel bad about what you're doing anymore. You just live.
Or it's a guy who has some faith but has like a double light. Right. I mean, it's doing more disruptive.
I discussed these matters with Corolla on his podcast. And then they had the ones, and 90-something% of the people said, that was a great discussion between an atheist and a guy who follows Jesus. So when no one was mean, he laid out his agenda, and I laid out Jesus.
Yep.
But some guy, his only response was, Phil Robertson, I strongly dislike you. I strongly dislike you. That's all he said.
I'm sure he's one of many. So the middle lane, what I call the middle lane, I see it as 3 lanes.
From Romans, though, right?
From Romans.
Yeah.
Is the middle lane is what I call the comparative lane. And that's the person we're describing. They only compare themselves to somebody else. Would you notice this? If you're in that lane, if you're this person from Romans 2, 1 through 16, then you never have a self-awareness. That was the problem. Your only awareness is compared to somebody else.
It's called self-seeking.
That's exactly right.
You were self-seeking the entire time with your visit on planet Earth.
Exactly. And so you're ignoring the same things as the other class. You just think you're a better person, which you're not, which is his point. And so I think that's the middle lane. And then the third lane, Jase, is the ones who have the law, which specifically Paul was a Jew. So he said, you think because you know the law, because you have the law, that makes you better, but it doesn't, because you can't keep it.
But I will have to say, because there's no excuse, we've already determined that. But I sympathize with, the Jew being God's chosen people.
Exactly.
And when I went to Israel, I sensed that in my discussions with them, because I kept, a lot of the people I talked to, they just thought Jesus was a good man, but he wasn't the Son of God. They stop at Malachi.
Right.
And I get it because of their history, and they have the law, but still, Paul made it pretty clear.
Very clear.
He started off saying, we've declared this Jesus through the Spirit of holiness as the Son of God by the resurrection of the dead, Jesus Christ our Lord. And then when he gets to chapter 3 in verse 22, it's like, this righteousness from God comes through faith in Jesus Christ to all who believe. Because if we just have the law
apart from law,
yeah, and we have our ability to keep it, as cool as it was that God gave it to you, you're just not going to be good enough.
Yeah, I know it. Let's take another break.
That James 2:10 always comes to me, because to me, the only success that I've seen in that discussion is that verse. Because it's like, you can keep the whole law, which is incredible, and yet stumble at one point. I'm quoting James 2:10, and you're guilty of breaking all of it.
Yeah.
I mean, what a dash to all those things that you thought, well, I'm better than most.
That's right.
Better than most.
So sometime I want to preach a sermon called A Tale of Two Pharisees, because Paul, obviously, he was Saul, but when he was struck down on that road, it had such a huge impact on him that he immediately became something different.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, no doubt about it. He was unique. But, the Nicodemus is, I think, more of a picture of what you're describing, Jase, of a Jewish Pharisee that started questioning everything he thought he knew when he met Jesus. And so when you go back to John 3 and you start reading about him when he first appears with Jesus, I think and then over time you start seeing that he'll pop up a little bit later. And then finally at the end, of course, he takes Jesus' body down. So we know he became a believer, but he was over time.
That's why I love how that show that I'm a big fan of, The Chosen, and we're working on.
It's going to happen.
It's happening.
It's happening.
We're going to get the creator, director, of that show on here. But I love how they portrayed Nicodemus.
Yeah.
In that show that I mean, they got it from here.
Right.
But even there's one moment in there where they captured really in his mind Nicodemus is looking Jesus and his followers. And you see his mind working. Nothing is said. You just see his mind working of, what are the consequences of me following them?
Yeah.
And his whole world would come crashing down on how he's viewed. And that's why I said about how one of the biggest excuses is your posse, who you're hanging out with and how you're going to be viewed. Because you're looking at all the benefits of Christ. Great. But then you're like, but how will I be viewed? And look, I really struggled with this as a teenager coming to Christ, because I knew if I do this, I am not going to be viewed favorably in a public high school. It's just not going to happen. And what I really struggle with is it's just the cheesiness of it, because I always looked at people at church as like, oh, these have got to be the cheesiest people in the world. They're not athletic. They don't, play games or have fun, or it just, in my mind, that was going to be a big struggle. Of course, once I got in, I realized that was all just in my mind.
Right. Well, I think of this third lane, me personally, I think sort of a lot of the modern church, around the world, especially in our culture in America, we kind of fit more in this category, to me, of thinking you got it all on straight.
Yep.
Oh, I agree.
I mean, 100%. I relate.
There's
more.
No need to come to Christ. Oh, I'm good.
That's right. And when you're not, and it's just not having awareness. Plus, you notice Paul uses, not only talk about the law, but in verse 25 of chapter 2, he brings up circumcision, which we've talked a lot about that on the podcast, about that being this mark. Obviously it was instituted by God with Abraham, but he says circumcision has value if you observe the law, but if you break the law, you become as though you had not been circumcised. If those who are not circumcised keep the law's requirements, will they not be regarded as though they were circumcised? So he's making the point that just because you have this physical mark, spiritually, you're still corrupt if you can't embrace Jesus.
right.
I mean, you miss it.
It comes down to the parable of the sower. If you look at it, the seed fell on the first one. He just didn't get it.
Yep.
Didn't understand. The evil one snatched away what was sown in his heart. He can't believe and be saved.
Depraved lane.
Depraved lane. So the next one, he says, man, that's it. That's it. That's what I've been waiting. Well, here comes persecution and whatnot because of the word that he just obeyed.
Yep.
Quickly falls away. That's two out of two. The third one, the cares of this world, the deceitfulness of wealth, and the things that happen to you while you're on the earth, you get all tangled up, and it just can't grow. Too many weeds. It's out.
Yep.
But the one it stuck was the one with a good and honest heart.
Yep.
Now that one produces a crop. It's 1 out of 4, not real good odds, but at least it's a thing you can look within the parameters of it, and you say, this thing is this gospel. It's when the seed's planted, better be honest with God and say, well, here's my sins. I got a lot of them,
right? And
it's by your mercy and grace that I'm going to get out of here.
That's right.
I'm going to exercise both to my neighbor.
Right.
I mean, the bottom line is you got to be real. And I mean, look, I'll say this right here. When people try to say complimentary things to me or even our family, I always try to get it back to God's in control. This is what you think, what you're viewing as me. Oh, y'all have helped me out. That's the Holy Spirit of God. It ain't me. Missy and I just this past week, we went and visited a couple of friends who are a couple of hours from Austin, but she was like, what do you want to do today? And I was like, let's go see our buddies, in Brian, because I love having in our group now on the other side of, from BC, before Christ in our lives, to, our posse. They were not, back then, they were giving me terrible advice and information, but now, after our encounter with Jesus, we try to have close people in our lives who encourage us and help us, and we're all on the same page. And there's a couple, their last name are the Van Normans. They live in Bryan, Texas, and they have an old house that was built in 1890. So I was like, let's go there. I'll find the treasures in their yard, and you can see the house, and you can talk to Casey's her name, and Justin is the guy. And she met them on a mission trip. I think it was Nicaragua. Oh, yeah. That's how she met them. Yeah. And Casey has written several books that Missy said, I read that book, and I was like, oh, please be my friend. Because she's like, I love this girl. And so they're two of our good friends. I tell you this story to say this. When you think you have it all together and everything's going good, because we have a tendency to do that. You don't recognize that we're all flawed. We all struggle. We all need encouragement. Because look, when we went there, we just had a day with us, beautiful day, and we talked. And when we got in the vehicle to go home, Missy, her first word, she said, I needed that. And I said, you know what? I did too. And she got kind of teary-eyed. And they weren't trying to encourage us. They just did. Yeah. We're doing the same things. That she's a counselor and deals with people, and they just love the Lord and they love people. But you realize in that moment that we're weak. We always get sidetracked. We get off. We need each other to get our focus on back to where the true power is coming, which is God and His Spirit and what we have in Jesus. And that's how we do it. They weren't trying to encourage us. They just did.
So what? Let's take one last break. So what you're describing is community, which is we'll get there in the Roman study. But it's interesting, Jay. So I preached the sermon yesterday, which I'm like you. And people say, "Man, you knocked it out of the park. You did a good job." All the accolades you get after a sermon. But I'm like you. I mean, when I pray, every time I speak, whether it's preaching or just sharing, I pray that the Holy Spirit will say what He needs to say through. I'm just a vessel, right. And so if it's bad, that means I got in the way. If it's great, that means I got out of the way and the Holy Spirit did what He was supposed to do. That's how it's supposed to work, right?
Because we have a tendency to always make excuses, I mean, they may be now, well, I'm tired. or people are not responding, or that's why you always need encouragement along the way, is that we are flawed. I mean, we screw this up in the beginning, and we have a tendency to screw this up after we're in Jesus. We just get off track. I think a good question to ask yourself, since Romans seems to be focusing on that, is what's my excuse?
Yeah.
I mean, it's a really good question. When you look at who Jesus is, because that's what led to this whole letter. Yeah. He's like, we're all in different lanes. We all have different forms of idolatry, and we rationalize, and we are in these physical bodies, and we get tired, and we make mistakes, and we do all these things. But we then justify how we live our life based on those excuses. And sometimes in life, you notice that when people encourage you. And, I mean, we're all doing the same thing, but I told you about this day we had. I think it was a God orchestrated arrangement. I mean, it just popped in my head, let's go see them. Right. But I really realized once we were there, oh man, we needed this. I just felt like ready to take on the world after that. And look, they might have felt the same way, but from my perspective, I'm like, man. So what's interesting is then, a day later, I'm speaking in front of this group of people, but my fire's been kindled. I've been talking to someone who they're spiritually mature in the Lord, and just being around them, they're the type of people, you punch them and just verses come out. It wasn't like they were just, had a plan for you.
That's right.
It's like your conversation is just. And so, we've talked a lot the last two sessions about excuses, but one of the ways on the post side of coming to Christ that you can do that's the opposite of excuses, is seek out people who love Jesus that you're around.
Yeah.
When I'm helping my kids, every time when we have a moment of like, they go off the parenting's tough. And you're like, what are we going to do? That's one of the first things. I'm like, you need to find people and seek them out who can help you spiritually. Because the reason these people pop in your head is the same reason that they will help you.
That's right.
Everybody should display of that was when Stone's little daughter got a little into some mischief on the internet. Yep. Boy, I've never seen a family structure rally around her.
That's exactly
like they
right.
did.
Exactly.
We all did. Because it does. The old Hillary Clinton line, it takes a village. It does take a community of people to be there.
Take the top 5 encouraging people from your phone. Not you, Phil, because you don't have one, but your Rolodex. You have the old timey.
No, he didn't. Mom has a Rolodex. He has like pieces of paper taped to the wall, which is
because what my left.
Yeah, what they're gonna do. The reason they're in your top 5 is they do the same thing as Paul did to the Romans, because he came that person to these people. He tried to get them to get their focus back on where the power source and where the glory and the credit should come from.
And by the way,
that's God's plan through Jesus.
Right. That little dissertation he went on in that Romans 1 and 2, and then now next, the Jewish people, I mean, it pretty well covers all of humanity. And you get that down there, you say, but amazingly, the sins are identical.
That's right.
To the ones 2,000 years. This is written 2,000 years ago. Wow.
Yeah.
That's a long time.
Well, and not only that, it's common. So Jase is right. To live unashamed is to be able to be open and to be honest, to self-reflect. I mentioned on the last podcast on IamSecond.com, they have done a kind of an update on original story about Dad, Jep, and Reed, Jase, your oldest. And now they've cut those into new episodes. They've added Lisa and I as well as Phyllis. But on that, it's called From Dysfunction to Dynasty. That's the name of the series, Jase. And I love it, the idea that we're all dysfunctional. And people say, oh, they come from a dysfunctional family. We're all dysfunctional without Christ.
Yep.
I mean, so how do you build a dynasty? Only through Jesus. I mean, only through the Holy Spirit. It's the only way it's ever going to happen. You're not going to do it any other way. I'm always, Lisa and I speak to an audience, and they're always surprised. And it's funny, they're not surprised that we struggled. They're surprised we're willing to talk about it. And I think that's the difference. I mean, I think that's what living unashamed is all about. You're willing to just admit it. I love Reed's episode on this Dysfunction of Dynasty because he was a teenager. He was having struggles that a lot of teens have, and he was willing to talk about it. I mean, that's how you impact people.
Yeah. Well, I was bringing up this, this couple, the Van Normans. I mean, what drew us to them is, boy, I'm telling you, when they tell their story, it's as blunt. I think she wrote a book called Raw Faith. It's raw. But that's the
Van Norman, that would be Swiss.
Dutch, maybe.
Never have.
The Van Normans.
I love it because she calls her husband the governor.
The governor?
The governor.
Yeah.
There's something about it. I love these people. He looks like
I'm going to tell Lisa to start
rider.
calling me the governor.
Yeah.
He looks like he just come off a bull.
Yeah.
He just has he got the cowboy hat and I don't
But
know.
if your woman is calling you the governor, that means he had a pretty good skill set, whatever he's
I
doing.
just thought that's a good sign.
I
right
like
there.
that.
I looked for in their yard, but whoever owned it before they did had evidently to make the grass look so good, they brought in a lot of dirt. So I didn't find a whole lot.
Yeah.
And he was kind of tagging along, watching me, like, what? Because ultimately he's thinking, man, we might find a bar of gold here. We're gonna get things all right. But
you gotta pay the governor, Dave.
I didn't find a whole lot. I found 3 wheat pennies and a lot of clad coins, but I found this one object that we couldn't figure out what it was. It turned out it was the tooling off of a machine because it had a patent number on it. It was like, in the year, it was like 1870 something. They made buttonholes. And so I said, well, so whoever lived here at some point 100 years ago, they had to be in some kind of fashion or clothing because this is off a machine and it was old, that made buttonholes. And he's like, well, that's interesting. I'm not sure it's going to be life-changing.
Well, Al, we go from this podcast to the meal I have presented for y'all.
What have you got?
We're going to drive a short distance and this is called sticky chicken.
I like the sticky chicken.
Sticky chicken.
I was actually nervous on what you were fixing to say.
Heavy on the garlic. Pan fried chicken, put it in the oven 1.5 hours, but you brown it on top of the stove.
This is a John Folse recipe, right?
John Folse, coming right out of his mother used to fix it.
Sticky chicken is one of my
Deep
favorites.
South Louisiana.
There you go. I like
Sticky chicken.
it. Let's go
We'll
eat.
let you know how it turns out.
Thanks for listening to the Unashamed podcast. Help us out by rating us on iTunes. And don't miss an episode by subscribing on YouTube, and be sure to click that little bell to get notified about new episodes. And for even more content that you won't get anywhere else, subscribe to Blaze TV at blazetv.com/unashamed.